far as box office
Really?
receipts.
Worldwide? It wouldn't surprise me. And in fact, you know what is interesting to me is if you look at against the, like the cost of the production against its earnings, it's probably dollar for dollar one of the best earners in the history of filmmaking. I mean, Big Boss and Fist of Fury were even cheaper, so maybe that would be even better odds. But Way of the Dragon, and of course it was huge. It was his biggest hit in Asia. I mean, Enter the Dragon didn't perform that well. People thought it was too westernized. It was in English. They dubbed it into Chinese, but it still didn't really work. Whereas this film was really the one where he played to his Asian audience perfectly.
And it's showing somewhere right now.
Yeah, as we
Many
speak.
places in the world.
Sure.
It just never stopped showing.
Yeah.
I was walking down Times Square in New York City a couple of years ago, and they had a big long line of people waiting to get in the film. And I was with a couple of friends and said, "Hey, look, they're playing Way of the Dragon over there, Return of the Dragon in the States."
Right.
But so we went over, and these guys said, "Hey, come on in."
Yeah.
Asked a lot of questions.
Incredible. I mean, and it's great that you're still healthy and active and mobile, that you go around and you can really appreciate this, because a lot of the people who've worked with Bruce aren't around really to enjoy it. And in fact, Bruce himself, tragically is not here to enjoy it.
No, I feel fortunate that way, and the fact that people do remember, and it's an honor.
Yeah, and this sequence here, I love the crisp choreography, each movement very clearly defined. I mean, today it looks great, but I mean, again, I really would say to people, look at the choreography of Hong Kong and American movies of this era, and it's amazing. You know who I think is underrated as a screen fighter, who had a little of the Bruce Lee about him, was James Cagney. And he was somebody who also had been a dancer, and there's a couple of movies he made. Blood on the Sun was one where he was doing jiu-jitsu. And he's very underrated as a screen fighter. You ever seen any Jimmy Cagney movies?
Oh yes,
Check him out.
And he was a great dancer too.
Yeah.
He could tap dance.
Dance, box, and Bruce, of course, had been a cha-cha champion. Did he cha-cha on the set?
He did a little cha-cha, yeah. He was a Hong Kong champion.
Right. I mean, this fight, it would be great if you could go back and say, okay, now let's have Chuck get into that rhythm of the Ali shuffle and continue the fight on and have it back on even pacing, and Bruce having to raise the notch again. But I guess, he reached a point of thinking, okay, fine, we're not going to have those long, drawn-out fights. But if there was ever something that left you wanting more, then it's, Bruce Lee in a fight sequence. It's economical.
But you know that it really should be called Bruce Shuffle.
Yeah.
Because Ali got it from Bruce.
That Ali was he copied. I know Sugar Ray Leonard had copied Bruce's style, but I thought that Ali was actually doing that before Bruce. But we'll go back and check. And it's something for the watchers of the DVD to debate and do their own research on, because we're not sure on that one. But coming up now, you see Bruce doing this kind of real Hollywood right left, the John Wayne style of punching, because it works well for the camera. So it's opposite to his economical straight line punching, or the techniques that he was teaching his Jeet Kune Do students. But he knew it worked for that specific instance. And one thing I really appreciate about Bruce Lee's films is the fact that in this particular sequence, he really doesn't state what he can imply, and he has this communication between these two warriors, especially set in the Colosseum. I mean, recently we had the big movie Gladiator by Ridley Scott, where you saw these guys fighting to the death, and he's making the very apt analogy of the modern martial arts guys, these new gladiators fighting to the death, and the sense of honor between them. And I think that's very interesting. And
he really captured it very well in this.
Right. They were actually, there was going to be a biopic shot by Universal about Bruce Lee that was shelved for whatever reason, and it went into pre-production, I think, very shortly after Bruce died. Was going to star a kid from Canada called Alex Kwon. I think Alex Kwok was his real name, but they called him Alex Kwon. And Chuck was going to be in the film, and Barbara Streisand was one of the producers, and they were actually going to go to Rome and shoot a real fight between this guy and Chuck. I mean, I don't know how well they would have done, but I mean, it would have been really interesting to see. I mean, it's a shame that project never happened. If it was bad, it would have been fun, and if it was good, it would have been worth watching on its own terms.
Well, when I was having dinner with Chuck, I did ask him, I said, if you and Bruce were in a real fight to the death, who would win? And he said, without thinking, he said, Bruce, of course.
Right.
Because nobody could beat him.
Right. I mean, I think my take on that when people ask those questions is, who would win between so-and-so and Bruce, is that, of course, Bruce isn't around anymore, but I mean, I think if you just talk about that sheer initial speed to take out somebody's vital targets, I mean, Bruce definitely had it. There's many comments people have made about Bruce. Even a great legend like him has his detractors, but no one ever said he wasn't fast and intense and powerful. And I think those are definitely attributes that make a great fighter. This sequence here, very touching. I mean, particularly its use of cinema, because there's no language, there's no voices. It's just the music and the imagery as he pays respect to a fallen foe. And it's a really nice sequence. And again, if you look at most martial art pictures, basically it was like you wipe the bad guy out and you walk off. And here he really respects the guy that he's killed in battle. You have to... The one thing I suppose in my mind is I look at it and think he didn't really need to have killed him, because he had him disabled at the point when he could have walked away. But I think it adds a certain pathos. Nice camera movement here. It's interesting because I think mainly it was shot relatively in sequence, the stuff in Hong Kong.
Is
This will be some of the last stuff shot.
Yeah.
So you actually can